Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I am your host, Paul O'Neid, and today I'm joined once again by a buddy of mine. He's been on the podcast before, so if you're interested in that episode, you can catch it way back about a year ago. Nick Bagley. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Man, it's weird that it's been that long. It doesn't feel like it's been a year ago.
I think we recorded the first one when I was still in Houston.
Maybe. I know I was still at my other apartment before I moved into this house. So
Yeah, I think I was in Houston because I remember the blank backdrop behind me.
yeah,
Like,
yours looks much better than my random pictures that I eyeballed and put up on my wall.
hey, man. Yeah, you did eyeball those for sure.
Oh yeah, they're definitely a little janky. Every time I see this, I'm like, it's a little off, huh?
I also just realized I totally forgot to do the intro for promos. So anyone who's listening up to this point, TC Nutrition, Coach's Corner University, Barefoot Shoes, Bacon and Barbells. You can find the links in the show notes. That's all they need to know. So because Nick's been on the podcast before, we've already done the intro, we've already done the background, and one of the things that I really want to jump into is Nick is a phenomenal coach. His company, Long Haul Fitness, has grown. You've expanded the number of competitors that you've worked with. You're putting out a ton of amazing information online to help other coaches learn and to help clients become more educated. I want to start the conversation on maybe what drives you right now from a content generation perspective to continue to put out the information that you do.
It drives me is an interesting one because a lot of times I feel like I'm just putting random stuff out.
I think we all do.
Yeah, and I don't ever have a plan when I've got a media guy, shout out Brick Wall Media. The dude has been with me for a long time. We've done almost like 20 shoots at this point. And
Awesome.
like most of the time when I'm shooting stuff, like I used to just do my own training, but now that I'm not bodybuilding, it's not as cool anymore. So plus it's like I'm not really worried about my social media being focused about me. It's like I want to show my clients and show like the stuff that they've done. So like usually I'll have him come in and do a session with one of my clients. Like I'll put my client through a session and then we'll talk about random stuff. And a lot of times the stuff that I come up with just kind of like flows. Like I don't have scripts. We don't have a plan going into anything. We don't go like, oh, we're going to, if there's something I need to shoot specifically, I'll do that. Or if I have an idea, but I've got a note in my phone where there's just all these ideas that'll randomly pop in my head of like, oh, that's good. Right. So I always write those down because if I don't, I will certainly forget them.
Yep.
And then like, I'll just kind of use those within those videos and stuff and try to find something on there. But social media is weird these days. You know, it's like for a while, like me talking worked well. And then somewhere along the way, it's just nobody cares anymore. They just want short clips with like some words in there, you know,
Yep.
and like that's all it seems to be. So just trying to shift things a little bit, but honestly, just putting out like my clients, like putting out their transformations and the things they've done and showing what we've been able to do this season and what I've been able to do with the people I've been privileged to work with. So like I don't know that there's like a driving thing. I feel like I could be doing a better job with content, but by being a little bit more specific with it. But I don't know. I just kind of like the raw, authentic stuff of just like, look, this is what I felt like putting out today.
Well, I think so. I think by accident, you're hitting on a number of points because when I look at what social media is for us as coaches, it's an avenue for us to reach our audience and create trust, create a relationship. And if someone's going to purchase coaching from you, they need to know you, like you, and trust you. And the only way to do that is to actually showcase who you are, what you do, who you help, and how you help them. And that's really the driving force for you, especially when you mention like showcasing your clients. I'm in a similar boat, man. Like I'm not training to be the strongest person on the planet anymore. I'm not training to be a mediocre bodybuilder anymore. I'm just training because I love training and I love working hard and pushing myself in the gym. And that's not as interesting to people. But what can I do? I can share the reasons why I choose to do the things that I do. I can share answers to questions that my clients are asking me. I can film stuff that I think would benefit the people that might potentially work with me in the future. And I'll be honest, like I don't feel motivated to post content most days, but it's part of the job. If you want to exist in the online world, you got to do it. So I might as well have fun with it and try to do it in a way that's at least dynamic. Um, I love the coaching your client through a session. It's like super, super beneficial. You can clip a million different reels from it, and you make it about the person, right? You don't make it
100%.
about you make it about the other person. I love that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a beneficial thing, and I think it's in a lot of ways helped out with retention. You know, because like
Mhm.
I know that's something you've talked a lot about is like retention is far cheaper than acquisition.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like trying to find new people to come coach with you is a lot harder than it is just to keep the people who decided to pull that trigger to begin with. And like they don't, especially if they're local. Like I'm not really like out and about on a regular basis. I don't have the time to be going to see everybody on a regular.
Mhm.
So getting them to be able to come in once or twice or whatever and shoot some content and put them through a session, I think one, we build a little bit better relationship and rapport between coach and client. And then two, it's like, yeah, sure, they may be sending me videos and stuff of their training, but me being able to be there in person is a completely different thing, right? Because like
Absolutely.
I can watch videos all day and I know how these people move and stuff, but even people that send me videos all the time, every single session that they do, when I train them in person, I can find other things. I
Yep.
can find little things here and there that we can tweak just a little bit and just, hey, try this. Hey, switch this position. Let's see how this is. And they always walk away going, oh, I got more out of that, just because like the in person versus videos is a far bigger difference. You know, it's not
Absolutely.
exactly the same.
I mean, we do what we can with what we have, but at the end of the day, putting your hands on somebody is going to be the best way to do it. And I think that that feeds well into one of the main topics that we wanted to discuss today, which was training execution and optimization. So I always look at the training itself as the most important stimulus of any intervention, whether we're talking about a general population client trying to gain gain muscle and lose fat, or we're talking about some professional bodybuilder trying to get to the stage. The biggest thing that's going to impact all of the other things that we're doing is the training stimulus.
100%.
Talk to me a little bit about how you look at training holistically, like on the whole of, what are we trying to accomplish? And then maybe some of the things that some of the big boxes that you try to check.
Yeah, training is by far the most important thing because, like, at the end of the day, like especially when we consider bodybuilding, it's like we're in a muscle building sport. How do we build muscle? We train, right? Like, obviously, we eat, we do the supplements, we do all those other things, we rest and recover. But if the training is not as good as it could be for that individual, they're probably leaving some stuff on the table, right? And this is something I've talked about with a number of people of like how many high level or moderate level like competitors have we seen that have a pretty good physique and train like shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of those people could go from having a decent physique or having a massively weak body part to having something that's way better just by changing execution, right? Um, so making sure that like my version of a dumbbell press lines up with the individual's version of a dumbbell press is big when it comes to making sure that we're actually building what we need to build, especially when it comes to something like a weak body part. Now, the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that training has far more benefits than just like building the muscle, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
and the biggest one that comes to mind within bodybuilding, especially as someone scales in muscularity, is a mobility thing, right? And like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, obviously we can use movement patterns to build triceps or build chest or build whatever, but we can also use those movements to improve their posing on stage, right? We can do things that allow them to open and move their shoulder blades better so they can do their back double better, do their lat spreads better. We can do things that reinforce the overhead position so they can do like an ab and thigh better. Like there's all these different things that we can work on and improve that allows us to create a better physique on stage beyond just more tissue, right? Like um I was fortunate enough to get to train with Sean Clarita a couple weeks ago. We just kind of like randomly fell into a training session together, and like Sean is a two-time 212 Mr. Olympia. Like he knows what he's doing. But I showed him a
Absolutely.
couple things of like, hey, look, give this a try. Try this exercise. See what you think about this. And one of the ones that like I've really been using a lot is an overhead tricep cable, right? And like
Hmm.
you're getting your elbows in this position where they're tucked and high, which is exactly what we end up doing in an ab and thigh. And it's like, yeah, cool, we're going to build triceps and you're going to get a nasty pump on this, but also at the same time, by reinforcing that position over and over and over, I bet you're going to be able to get into that position a lot easier next time you go pose. So it's like I'm not going out of my way to find movements that like is going to just work on helping them move better. But if I have movements that can accomplish the goal we're looking to accomplish, as in build the tissue that we need to build, as well as reinforce better position of the joint, like that's a huge win for us, right? Because like we've all heard the big guy be like, oh, I can't get into that pose, and then when you see them do the pose, you're like, I can tell you can't get into that pose, like,
Right.
and I think a lot of people get really confused on what flexibility and mobility is because, yeah, sure, like you can do the splits and you can do all these different stretches and stuff, but like when you are doing a static stretch, how does that carry over to the real world, right? Like,
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I don't ever have like a string to raise my arm up over my head passively, right? Like I have to lift it and put it over my head. I have to have the ability to do that, which
Right.
means I have to have the strength to get into that position. So like a lot of mobility comes down to like the joints and the muscles being strong in those positions that you are not able to get into. And it's not like we go and force you into positions, but slowly over time we can just start to move that needle of like, all right, with that overhead tricep moving as the example, okay, maybe you can only get your elbows to here, but over time let's try and raise them up more. Let's try and get you into a higher position so that we can continue to reinforce that stuff, because at some point you're not going to be a bodybuilder and you're going to be 70 at home by yourself and you're like trying to get a can up on the top shelf and you can't get to it because of all the stuff you did when you were younger. So like, yeah, let's build the tissue now, but also make sure that we're good to survive on our own when we're beyond this, you know?
That's one of the things that I try to hammer home with a lot of my content lately, especially as I've transitioned into, being a lifestyle guy, is I still train like a bodybuilder, but my exercise selection is just a little bit different. My execution is a little bit different because I want to get into those deep end range positions and establish a little bit of motor control. And I think we forget that mobility is a function of both the tissue, we'll call it, we use the word pliability, the ability to move that tissue, but also the central nervous system to control that tissue in that space. An old FRC or functional range conditioning principle is like if you do a bicep curl as hard as you can and you're still able to push that fist closer to your shoulder, but if you try to flex your bicep in that position, it's really hard and you'll probably cramp. So all we're doing with training is we're using the load to allow our nervous system to exert force in these end ranges. And we can't ignore the role that training has in improving function alongside hypertrophy. So when you see guys who've accumulated or in girls accumulate massive amounts of muscle mass, they lose that mobility because they're training within such restricted ranges. And they're also training with movements that require zero internal stability. So, you have this push for, okay, external stability. We need to drive output in the target tissue. It's like, yes, absolutely. But we still need some internal stability because if we don't have that, we're going to lose access to those joint end ranges. We're going to lose access to those, more deep stabilizer muscles, our core musculature, and eventually we will lose range in our movements. And you create a glass ceiling of progression. I see it all the time where like, oh man, I just can't push my hack squat up. It's like, okay, cool. Like let's put in some Bulgarian split squats. Let's put in some B stance RDLs. All of a sudden your hip stability improves. You're able to access better internal rotation. And now you can get deeper into that hack squat and your output increases. Your stimulus gets better. Oh my God, my hack squat's moving up and my quads are growing like crazy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you're neglecting your hip stability, shoulder stability, whatever, like you're eventually like not only are you going to run out of range of motion, but you're also probably going to be one of those people's like, oh, I can't do that movement anymore because it hurts, right? And
Oh
like,
yeah, I see that all the time. It's like your
yeah,
movement repertoire just shrinks.
100%. So now, like, oh yeah, maybe age related. Like the thing that people always talk about is like after a certain age, people start losing their legs, right? And like maybe it's not because of age. Maybe it's because you have abused yourself for so long that you can't do the things that you used to be able to do. Not saying that you need to train like an absolute animal like you're 18 years old again, but like can you still access those full ranges of motion and train in those positions, right? And like use the tissue and use loads that are adequate enough to create a stimulus. And like I'm sure that you can relate to this as well, is like one of the number one things I hear on a regular basis, like, oh, my adductors hurt. And like they're hurting really bad, and I strained them or I pulled it or whatever. It's like that adductor is your check engine light on your legs. Like,
Mhm.
hey, there's something wrong. And like the primary function or one of the main functions of the adductor is to stabilize the pelvis. It's not just to bring your knees together on an adductor machine, right?
Mhm.
Like it's been boiled down to the adductor does this, it closes your legs, and it's like the adductor does so much more than that.
It's a
And if
hip
it doesn't,
extender. Yeah.
right, if it doesn't understand how to take the hip and stabilize it through all the different ranges of motion that you can access on the pelvis, like you're gonna run out of things you can do eventually, and like everything's gonna hurt that. And I'm speaking from experience on that because adductor issues is has been the bane of my existence for my entire bodybuilding career. Is like before I knew what was actually happening, I was like, oh, I'm just really sore. But in reality, it's like I shouldn't be so sore that this thing hurts to touch or that it cramps up when I try to stand up from bed. You know, like that's an issue. So the more we can work on things like shoulder stability and hip stability, core stability, like the more we can drive those movements that are externally stabilized, right? Like the more we can create internal stability, the more we're going to be able to express that function through that joint. So it's massive, you know.
So, but what about Nick, man? I'm doing my warm-ups, I'm doing my activations, I'm doing my hip bridges, I'm doing my banded lateral walks, and I'm still my mobility's not going anywhere. Why is that?
Well, I mean, one, it's a time thing, and two, it's like you also have to get strong in those things. You know, it's like you can't just like do a body weight hip bridge and think it's going to be good enough. You know, and maybe you're doing the movement's pretty shitty. Like maybe you think you're doing it right, and you're just continuing to reinforce the wrong movement pattern. Like because look, I've done it. Like Danny, our mutual fan, Danny La Martinez, like I'll send her something and think I'm doing a great job. And she's like, here, this, and this are all wrong. Like obviously in a different manner,
Of
but
course.
still, it's like, oh shit. It's like I missed that, and I'm think I'm halfway decent at this. So there is it's a lot of things like that. So it's like make sure your execution is correct,
Mhm.
and then make sure you're actually doing things that reinforce it in a strength manner, right? It's not just about doing your warm-ups and saying that that's good enough. It's like making sure that you're also utilizing movements within your training that are going to allow you to now take that range of motion that you created through your warm-ups and then reinforce it with the strength itself, you know.
Yeah, I look the way I classify it is like we have to grade the stimulus at some point. So when working with Danny, there was, obviously we did a lot of quote unquote corrective exercise. There was a lot of drills at the beginning of the session to either open up ranges or just give you a better proprioception of where you were in space. But those alone didn't do anything. It was when I was able to transfer those cues and those sensations and that proprioception into the main lifts and then execute them in a way that allowed me to feel those things that move the needle. So whenever I hear people like, "Oh man, my knees hurt when I do pendulum squat," I'm like, motherfucker, I exploded my kneecaps and I can full range pendulum squat less than 20 weeks post surgery with no knee pain. You're fine. You're just training like an idiot.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think just people don't look past the bare bones basics of pendulum's good for quads. You know, it's like, yeah, sure it is, but like if you don't have that range of motion to access, and then you're forcing yourself into that position, no shit, your knees hurt. Something's gonna have to go, and more than likely, it's because your hips suck. Like it's not that the knee is the problem; it's that you're exerting forces on positions that you just don't know how to control to begin with, and you're probably also not really giving yourself time to learn that movement either. Like you give somebody a new exercise and the first thing they want to do is try to max that thing out, and it's like, hey, hey, calm down. Like, sure, a bicep curl, like, all right, cool, go ahead and send it. That's not that difficult. But when we're looking at a movement pattern like some type of bilateral squat, like that is a complex movement pattern that we need to give the body time to adjust to, right? It's like you have to allow yourself that time to relearn those things, even if it's something you've been doing for X number of years.
One of my favorite things to harp on with my clients when it comes to learning new movements is slowing things down, especially into end ranges. So using tempos and using isometrics and pauses in those deep end ranges to allow them to feel what that tension feels like, to allow them to feel what the pressure feels like on their hands, feel what the pressure feels like on their feet. And the slower you can get into that deep stretch position, that the more you'll realize that you can continue to yield into those positions. And that applies to, bilateral squatting. That also applies to probably the most egregious thing that I see is rowing and pull downs. Guys rushing out of that stretched position as opposed to getting into that stretch, letting that scapula protract, letting that scapula elevate, and then connecting with the lat as you drive that elbow down or that elbow back. If you're talking about upper back row or a pull down, it's the longer you can spend in those end ranges feeling tension, the better access you're going to have. The lower weight you will have to use because you'll fatigue much more quickly, and the better connection you'll have to the muscle when you're performing each repetition. Tempo is one of the most underutilized strategies in bodybuilding because people, have been told, oh, the evidence says that slow eccentrics don't build more muscle. It's like, maybe, but slow eccentrics allow you to get into better end range positions. And we know that the stretch position is probably where there's going to be the most hypertrophy for most muscles. So it would behoove you to just slow the fuck down.
Yep. 100%. And like the thing that came to mind when you were talking about that is my client Chase. Unfortunately, he won't be at nationals this year because of a bicep tear. But
Oh,
when he,
shit.
yeah, I know, 2 weeks out from nationals, he tore his bicep on regular dumbbell curls. So
Oh, my God.
definitely devastating. But he'll be back before long, and we'll be ready to kick some ass. But when he first came to me, he was having some issues with like a strain in like his glute, and was having a hard time doing squats and stuff. So the first thing I had him do was slow things way down, like strip some weight off. Like, I know you're strong,
Mm-hmm.
pull back by 20 to 30%, and just give me a 4 or 5 second negative.
Yep.
Like, this is a very specific thing here. Is like, I don't tell everybody to do a 4 or 5 second negative. Like, I don't think most people need to go that slow unless there's something super specific we're looking at there. It should be controlled for sure, but to have to go 1, 2, 3, like the whole, like you're just gonna take away from your ability to output if you're sitting here trying to count how slow you're going. But specifically in his case, like just slowing things down a little bit and stripping that weight back with those slow negatives, we didn't have any issues with that spot after a couple of weeks. Like, he didn't have a single issue at all. And then he went from like having to strip back 20 to 30% to being 20 to 30% over what he was doing prior. Right.
Yep.
And that's huge for somebody like him who's as strong as he is. So it's like there's a time and a place to make sure that like we put those tempos in positions to make sure that it's reinforcing whatever it is we need to reinforce.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can grade this. I did a post recently about how I tend to use tempos, and that I'll either do the top set with a tempo and then take the tempo away, use the same weight and try to exceed the reps, or I'll do the tempo on the back down set. So the discrepancy in load from set one to set two is much greater. But it doesn't have to be I only train with tempo, or I only train without tempo, or I never do pauses, or I always do pauses. You can pepper these into your program strategically to get access to the things that you need to get access to. I mean, I did a set of leg extensions on Friday that was 13 reps and took me 4 minutes it took me 2 minutes and 47 seconds to do 13 reps.
Jeez. It's
But
an eternity on a leg extension.
exactly. But my goal on the leg extension is to connect with my quads again, to get them to fire properly, to be able to get my rectus femoris involved in that extension of the quad in the seated position. So like there's a lot going on there, and I can't do that if I'm moving fast. Do all
Yeah.
my reps need to be that fast or that slow? Absolutely not. But keep the goal the goal. right?
Right. And then the other issue with like when people just don't pay attention to tempo at all is like most of the time when they're getting into that in range, it's just they're being yanked back into that position, or they're being like
Mm,
in a squat pattern, they're just dropping into that position. And then like, well, yeah, of course you're going to hurt yourself at some point, especially if you're someone who can move some weight around. So like it also comes down to like a injury prevention and uh extending the runway of a training program, right? It's like the one
mhm,
thing that can derail a training program is an injury, right? And that it'll
absolutely.
completely throw things off because like maybe you injure your leg, and then because you've injured your leg, you now start to kind of not want to go to the gym and do everything else you can do, right? So like the number one way we can make sure we squeeze everything out of a training program is making sure that we're staying injury free, and not just like bouncing into those end range positions is going to make sure that we don't do that, you know? And then also at the same time, I think there's a lot to be said about making sure that when you're moving into those end ranges, you are moving into those end ranges using the tissue that we're trying to use, right?
Absolutely.
It's like the biggest thing that everyone wants to talk about right now is like lengthened reps and getting into that lengthened range of motion. But it's like I'm sure someone could argue it differently, but like, especially like you were talking about pull downs and rows, one of the things that I think most people end up doing is like on a pull down specifically is like they're getting into that stretch, but it's just offloading into every other thing other than their lat. Right. And it's like if we can make sure that when we're getting into those stretch positions, that it's actually coming from my lat, that's going to make a big difference in making sure that we're actually able to make progress there. Right. Because
Mhm.
like we have to make sure we're contracting from the tissue we're looking to contract, but then at the same time we also have to make sure we're stretching from the muscle we're looking to target, you know, like that is super important in making sure that we're actually getting the most out of those exercises. So the how you execute those end ranges of motion is also super important.
I look at it as there's range of motion of a joint, there's range of motion of a movement, and there's range of motion of a muscle. And so there's tons of examples where your range of motion might look shorter than the range of motion of the joint or of the movement. But if that's all that you have in the muscle that you're trying to train, train in that range. And eventually that range will expand over time as you gain more control. And then you'll be able to get into a deeper and deeper stretch position. You have to be training what you're supposed to train. And I think that feeds very well into the next point that I wanted to talk about. And that once we've optimized for training stimulus, let's talk about training intensity. Because I think people talk about intensity as this thing where I have to squeak out every single possible ounce of repetitions from this set. Unbeknownst to them, they start compensating with other muscle groups. They start using momentum. Training to failure means training to failure of that target tissue.
Yep.
So if it means that you have to reset your logbook because you're training to failure in the target muscle before you start to compensate, when you're compensating, that's when injuries are going to happen. When you're relying on momentum, that's when injuries are going to happen. So that first rep needs to look exactly like that last rep, the only difference being concentric speed.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I mean, like the thing that like I'll whenever I'm responding to client feedback, if I need to, or training videos, like if I need to tell them like, hey, look, you're doing a great job of control here, but we're kind of getting into the squeezy zone, right? Like where everything they do is just like, hey, let me squeeze it as hard as I can. It's like, look, let's put some dick into this. Like let's move a little weight on this thing here. Like yes, I know it is heavy, but I can also see by the way you're executing your movement pattern that you're not trying to put every ounce of your force into that movement, right? And like there's a fine line between like moving with intention and trying to make a hard contraction and then just slinging stuff, but like figuring like that's where we use that time of like let me learn this movement pattern to
Mhm.
be able to reinforce that of like I'm going to give myself some time before I start using the heaviest weights possible to see what does it feel like to actually squeeze the muscle and feel it on this exercise and those kinds of things. And then as that weight climbs, we can continue to keep that connection with putting a little dick into it. Like I said, you know, like we have to make sure that we're still training forcefully. And the thing that people will talk about is like, we're not here to squeeze pink dumbbells, right? It's like, we're not just trying to sit here and squeeze every single muscle fiber, because there's something to like recruitment, like putting some effort into it and trying to get every single bit of fiber to fire possible, is that's going to come from putting a little effort into that, whatever that movement is that we're talking about, you know. Like, so don't be afraid to like put some effort behind it, but you also have to understand that like we're also not here to just sling stuff around, you know.
Yeah, you have to learn the movement first. It's like you got to walk before you can run. So spend time learning the movement. As you get more comfortable in your execution, now you can start to increase load, increase force output. But it's okay to take some time to learn that movement and, almost like grade the stimulus a little bit, because you can get to failure within the squeeze zone, but we still have to put tension through tissues, and that's going to be accomplished with load.
Yep. Yeah,
And I
you're
think
just going to limit
yeah,
yourself if you're trying to squeeze all the time. You know, you're going to limit your capability of weight lifted. You know, if you're just like trying to.
one of the things that, once we got execution, once we got intensity locked in, one of the things that I see kind of ignored lately is the role that training can play in regulating nutrition. I see it time and time again, that person who has to diet themselves into oblivion to get lean. Lo and behold, they're training like an absolute pussy.
Yep.
Now you teach them how to train. All of a sudden they can eat more food and they're getting leaner with less cardio and more food.
100%.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought you were there. It looked like you froze for a second on my side, so I was like, "Uh oh."
No.
But yeah, I mean, like, and that goes like even deep into a prep, right? Where it's like those last 6, 8, 4 weeks when people are feeling their absolute worst. Like the first thing to start going is their ability to train intensely, and then that just makes it even that more difficult to get them as lean as we need for stage. You know, so um, yeah, I mean, if you're dieting the hell out of someone and you're not seeing the return that you should expect from their calorie output, there's probably something that needs to be said about training, right? Well,
Mhm.
like if you are not assessing their training, you're not watching how they're training, maybe you need to, and maybe that's going to be the missing link that's going to help you there, because like at the end of the day, training is going to be our number one stimulus for all of these, for fat loss, for muscle building, for all these different things. Like, yeah, cardio is important, but it's not going to be our number one thing when it comes to like getting someone in shape, whether a lifestyle client or a bodybuilder. Is like, if you can output really aggressively in the gym, I guarantee you're probably going to burn more fat and build more muscle than you like getting on the treadmill, right? So like you can't out cardio and out diet training like a pussy, like you said, you know.
What are some mistakes that people make in that quest for keeping intensity high while we're trying? Let's talk about a dieting scenario. They're like, man, I need to keep my training intensity high. What are some mistakes that people might make when they're in that deep deficit but still trying to train hard?
Not taking rest. Like
Okay.
the biggest thing that I see is it's not even necessarily a training thing, a training mistake. It's that they get in this idea of like, oh, I don't need to take rest days because we're trying to accomplish this lofty goal. And then next thing you know, they're going in on their rest days and doing a little extra. They're adding a little extra volume here or there. They're adding in some extra stuff because like maybe they are struggling with putting intensity into their training. So the way they're trying to make up for it is by doing more volume. And it's like, no, you're doing
Okay.
the exact opposite of what we need to do here. Like you're doing the exact reverse of what we should do, because like you're in a calorie deficit. You do not have the recovery capacity to not take rest days. You do not have the ability to recover from that stuff. It's not possible, especially if you're in an extreme deficit trying to rip all the body fat off your body that you possibly can. So making sure that like you're not doing extra and actually following things as they are listed out is going to be the bigger return. And then at the end of the day, if like we discussed, like intensity is going to be one of our number one drivers when it comes to getting results, maybe you're doing too much volume where you already are, because of like maybe your calories are so low that you need to strip a little bit of volume off so that you can be more intense with whatever volume you do have. So like instead of trying to add more to make up for that intensity, let's strip it back a little bit and just be more intense with what we already have programmed.
That was kind of exactly the answer I was looking for, because the thing that I see most often is people will say, okay, I can't lift heavy. So now I'm going to start to do all these drop sets and rest pause sets and set intensifiers. But what we're inherently doing here is we're increasing the amount of fatigue we're accumulating, but we're already in an accumulated fatigue state from the diet, from the cardio, everything like that. So what if we just pulled it back and you did less total work, but you made sure that that total work was as of high quality and intent as possible? Now you go in and you're like, okay, my leg day used to be 3 sets of leg curls, 2 sets of adductors, 2 sets of pendulum, 2 sets of leg press, 2 sets of lunges. So that's a pretty big day, especially when all those sets are taken to failure. But now as you fatigue, maybe that leg press gets to 1 set.
Yep.
Maybe that 3 sets of leg curl goes to 2. And now you're looking at your day and you're like, oh, well, like I just cut off 2 work sets. It's a lot easier when I'm fatigued to push that 1 set of leg press to failure and really get the most out of it and squeeze everything I can. Maybe then I can keep the relative intensity of the whole session higher. You also hit on a big point with rest periods between sets, right? If we really want to have good output, we need to make sure we're fresh for those sets. So rushing the tempo of your workout is just going to decrease the quality of the work. It's going to decrease the stimulus. It's also going to drive up fatigue. And then not being afraid to take a rest day.
Yep.
Right? Those rest days are so important, especially if people get stuck in there. Oh, Monday is this day, Tuesday is this day, Wednesday is this day. It's like, yeah, for sure. Or it could be a rest day and you could push everything off. Yeah, there's some complications with regards to like, oh, well, I have a training partner and my training partner trains on this day. And totally, if we can factor that in there, everything is figure outable.
Yep.
But maybe you go in and you hit a deload session, like one light session that's of high quality versus taking that session all the way to failure, adding intensifiers, blah, 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 blah. Now we're digging ourselves out of a hole instead of digging that hole even deeper.
Yeah.
The other factor I want to talk about, so we talked about dieting. Let's talk about weight gain, right? Let's talk about, okay, calories are high. What are some mistakes that people make with training when calories are really high and climbing, you're off season, you're full go? What are some mistakes that people make in that situation?
Chasing load. It's that every single time, right? Because it's like you've got all the calories in, you feel really good, and you've been seeing weight climb for a little while, and like maybe you're looking at a weight on the machine, you're like, oh, I really want to get to that, and like I want to max out the stack, or I want to hit the 150s on incline, or I want to do whatever it is that you have in your head of like, I want to accomplish this goal, and you start chasing that too hard over just like letting that progress come as it's going to come, right? It's like trying to chase weight is going to end up putting us back in a position where we're losing that tempo, we're losing the contractions that we could be getting out of it. You're not getting as many reps out of it. Maybe you're not. I know that I'm going to get some flack for this one, but like you're not feeling the muscle as well as you should, which like I'm sure.
How dare you?
Like I know that feeling the muscle isn't the most important thing ever when it comes to muscle building, but when we look at a bodybuilding specific type program, there is some efficacy to making sure that when you are doing that exercise, you can feel that muscle doing the contraction that carries over to an eventual better stage look. Like anecdotal completely on my end, but I do see a lot of efficacy out of that, of like making sure we can feel the muscle actually doing its thing. Like I know a lot of people say the pump doesn't mean much, but like you fuck you, like the pump does mean a lot.
Pump means a lot.
Yeah, the pump does mean a lot, because first off, you get a good pump, you feel great about yourself in the session and you feel like you've accomplished something, and it feels good to get a pump. So why would we not? And part of getting a pump is making sure we can feel the muscle when we are doing the exercise. So like, hey, there's probably something to that. Yeah. So when it comes to the off season, just people just want to hit those strength goals, which is great. We should focus on strength goals during that time, just so you're not sitting here focused on how you look on a regular basis. But it doesn't need to be the end all be all here. It's like at the end of the day, making sure there is a progressive approach to this is what matters. And I think I heard Kuba talk about it not all that long ago, is like, if you're making 25-pound jumps or 50-pound jumps or whatever it is every time you go into the gym, like that's not progressive. Like that's just you throwing weight on something. Progressive is a very slow, methodical process that takes a long time to get to the strength of someone like Jordan Peters, right? Like
That guy's a
that's
fucking
something.
mutant.
Yeah, that guy's insane. Most people aren't going to get to that level of strength, but nor do I think they should. But like it's a slow process. It's not like if you're maxing out on the hundreds on incline dumbbell, you're not going to be doing 200s in 16 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever that training cycle is. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just not going to happen. If you go from hundreds to 130s, that should be great. Like that is an increase, right? Especially if it's done in the appropriate manner, where like you started off and you could only get 8 reps, and then you got 9 and 10 and 11 and so on and so forth, and it just progresses on itself that way. So focusing on weight. And then like the number one thing that I see from people is like when I give them a rep range, it's 8 to 12, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
your heaviest sets 8 to 12. They get way too focused on 8, of like, all right, well, I got 8 with the 150s last week, so that means I can go up. It's like, no, stop. Take those 150s and keep going until you can get 12 and then go up, right? Like, let's be a little bit more intelligent about this and not just be like, I made the bare minimum threshold, which means I can do more. It's like, no, like the goal, the thing that I always tell people when I list out their training programs is like, look, your rep range says 8 to 12. I want your goal to be 12. 8 is your buffer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I finally pick a weight and I'm able to hit failure at 12 and it's time to go up, don't go up so much that you go below 8. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you get 8 or 9, keep that weight until you can get 12. And then we go up again. Be incremental with it, because it's not just about more weight.
Yeah, one of my favorite strategies is like, so if I look at any exercise for a rep range of 8 to 12, that means I have an 8 rep max, a 9 rep max, a 10 rep max, an 11 rep max, and a 12 rep max. That's 5 rep maxes. If every week I try to set a new rep max at any one of those numbers on my first set, and then a different rep max at one of those numbers on the second set, and then I just do that for a really long period of time, bro, you can milk progressions out of an exercise for a year. Like
100%.
as long as calories are in a good spot and you're doing all the right things outside the gym, you don't need to change your rep ranges. You don't need to change your exercise selection. You can milk progressions over and over and over and over and over again. I sound like Marshawn Lynch. And you like that's one of the things that I see a lot is like chasing novelty,
Yep.
right? Switching up exercises every 4 to 6 weeks. Every 4 to 6 weeks, that's kind of like when you hit the stride of that progression. You've
100%.
learned the movement, you can connect to it well. Now you can push your load a little bit more. I have a client, he did a 24-week off season. We didn't change his training once. He's I think 7 or 8 pounds heavier than his last off season, but he looks like his like 12-week out. It's like that's progression, right?
100%.
That's obviously some quality tissue that we built in that situation. And now he's in a better position to start his prep when we decide to do that after this health phase. So as long as he doesn't fuck up his health phase, we're going to have put on a lot of muscle mass in our off season that we can then put that on stage. So we talked about training, and I think that was a lot of amazing information. The one thing that I wanted to chat about with you, you coach a lot of female clients who achieve some great results. I see female clients getting the most mistreated of any population in our industry, whether it be the overprescription of PEDs, whether it be training them into the ground, whether it be dieting them into the ground. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what makes training females a little bit different than training males. Let's start maybe on the training side, and then we'll transition to the nutrition side.
Yeah, I mean the number one thing with females is like most. I'm not going to say most. There's a lot of coaches out there that just treat them like they're small men, right? And it's not how that works. Like men don't have a menstrual cycle. Men don't have this swing of hormones on a regular basis that causes such vast changes in their body. So like that's a huge one there. As far as training, I mean, men and women can train fairly similarly. Like it's not like there's men exercises and women exercises. Like no, we're all
Right.
doing Bulgarians, we're all doing hack squats, we're all doing those same things. Um, the movement pattern is just the thing that creates the stimulus, right? But I think oftentimes women, one, can handle a little bit more than men. They tend to have a little bit higher threshold as far as like their ability to endure pain, right?
Yep.
Which it has some carryover to them having children, right? Like I don't know about you, man, but I'm not trying to squeeze out a baby. Like that sounds like the worst thing ever. Like
Nope.
I'm cool. So the
10 out of
fact that they
10,
can
no for
endure
me.
that, they can probably endure a lot more than I can in the gym, right? And like there's probably some carryover there. But at the same time that they can handle more intensity, there's also we also probably need to give them a little bit more rest on certain occasions as well. Like there's going to be this threshold of like, yeah, we've pushed you really hard, we need to pull you back really hard at the same time. Like there needs to be an ebb and flow of those things. So like not being afraid to push a female to train hard, regardless of whether they're a bikini client, a wellness client, like whatever category they're in, they need to train hard. Training hard is the thing that's going to get us the goal that we want to get to, right? So like
Mhm.
don't treat them like any different. They don't need to exclusively be training 15, 20 reps and squeezing and doing all that stuff. Like this toning idea is stupid. We all know that at this point.
Mhm.
Um like so they should still be training really intensely, but then at the same time also be ready to pull it back when you need to and let them kind of take a little breather and relax a little bit and then push them again. Versus men, it's like you can kind of just go, hey, go. Just go until the fucking wheels fall off, you know.
Yeah.
So it just it obviously that's individual based in the context of the situation we're in.
Yeah, for sure. I think you hit on a number of points. The main point that I think you hit on, but I don't know if people understood, was if you're dealing with a female, because they have the ebb and flow of their hormones over the course of the month, women also tend to be more susceptible to the impacts of cortisol and stress.
Mm-hmm.
So cortisol and stress is going to throw the biggest monkey wrench into a female's progression, whether it's with a diet or whether it's with an off season. So being able to recognize the biofeedback that comes along with that. And then conversely is women will tend to be able to tolerate more volume. That doesn't mean they have to do more volume. That
Yeah.
just means they can tolerate it. Is there a reason to increase their volume? Maybe, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to. The other factor in that is, in my experience, females tend not, we'll say more novice females, tend to not be as confident pushing towards that mechanical failure. So they will then require more training volume to get the same stimulus. And again, it's an inter-individual difference, but you as the coach need to have eyes on that training so that you can make the educated decisions on whether we need to push more volume, we need to push less volume. You need to keep an eye on that logbook to make sure that we're moving in the right direction with our loading and the execution stays consistent week over week over week. Now, let's switch gears into the nutrition conversation, because this is an area where I probably like I obviously have a unique perspective in that my wife is an IFBB pro. She also trains harder than any dude I've ever met. So that is just, I have trained around some of the most world-class athletes. You put Liv on any machine and her, what you would perceive to be like a zero RAR, she's still got 3 in the tank. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a reason why she's built the muscle mass that she's built.
100%.
That's also carried over to, she's not afraid to eat.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you deal with clients that are just, especially female clients, are just simply afraid to eat? And how do you kind of work through that?
Every girl, every girl is afraid to eat. Well, I shouldn't say every girl, but like the ones who, every girl that hasn't figured it out is afraid to eat, right? Like the ones who have realized, like, oh, when I eat more, I look better, I feel better, I train better, like all these things are improving. They start to click with it and understand, like, oh, okay, cool. This food is doing me good, right? And like The food is the thing that is going to allow us to build whatever it is you're looking to build, whatever physique it is that you're looking for, whether it's bikini all the way up to women's bodybuilding. The food is what's going to allow us to build the tissue, right? And if you're constantly in a calorie deficit because you're terrified to gain weight, like that's not a good place for us to be in, because we know that a chronic diet is a terrible thing for hormones, for muscle building, for sleep, for all sorts of different things, right? There's a cascade of problems that come along with chronic dieting. And understanding that food's not the enemy, it's applying food in the right manner, right? And pushing food is always relative to the individual. Like if I have 100-pound girl, like she's not going to be eating 4,000 calories, right? But if I have a women's bodybuilder who's a very very strong individual, putting a lot of effort into things and has the appetite of a man, like maybe she needs 4,000 calories, right? So like that's all going to be relative to the individual, but like showing them, hey, look, I know this sounds counterintuitive to what you have kind of learned and taught yourself through the years of you not eating, but just trust me. Give me a few weeks on this surplus and let me show you what we can do, right? And like the biggest thing there is just getting them to buy into listening, right? Just look, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but you paid me to do a job, let me do it. You just check the boxes. And it's always a constant fight. Like I know a lot of women get really anxious when it comes to like, oh, you want me to eat more food? And it's like
Mhm.
you should be striving to try and eat more food. let
That's a
let's
great
try.
reframe.
Yeah, like let's try and see how much food you can handle while we make progress towards the thing we're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
So that meaning like that doesn't mean just shovel everything into your face and we just let things happen to the body, but it's like we need to get that surplus to a place where it's high enough to build the muscle without accruing a ton of ton of body fat, and then be able to train really intensely. Because like if those females do have to go through more volume, or if they're like your wife and can push themselves really hard, they're going to fall apart if they're not getting the right amount of nutrients in their system.
I love what you said about trying to strive to eat more food, because I think we see the same issues with females being afraid to eat as we do males being afraid to diet.
Yep.
It's kind of like a two ends of the same spectrum. The guy is going to think, man, if I don't eat this much food, I'm going to lose muscle. And the female will tend to think, I can't eat this much food, I'm going to get fat. One thing that I have found extremely beneficial is something that you hit on. It's like, if we can eat more food, we can train harder. And if we can train harder, then we can drive more of a stimulus, which is going to allow you to eat more food. And during those, we'll call them push phases, like where we're pushing body weight and pushing food, you have more calories available. And that's when you can actually work with that female client on improving her relationship with food, having those conversations around, hey, you're allowed to have some flexibility here. If you want to have some dark chocolate every night, we can fit that into your plan. If you want to swap out some of your carbohydrates from cream of rice because you feel like having a Rice Krispie treat, we can do that. I'm not going to penalize you for that as long as we're making the appropriate swaps macro for macro. Now, this idea of food freedom creeps in. They have less anxiety over their food choices. They're seeing how increasing their food will improve their performance, and now they see food as a fuel and as a tool, as opposed to a stressor that they need to constantly be worried about. The number of women that I've worked with who, once they realize food becomes fuel, food becomes a tool, they love training. They realize how much they love training, and they realize how much more they can train and tolerate when they're eating a lot of food. Not to mention, they're going to be able to maintain their menstrual cycle longer, because when you transition that big surplus of calories into a prep scenario, they can get leaner eating more food, which means less disruption to cortisol, which means less disruption to that HPO axis. Man, we're cooking with gasoline here.
Yep. 100%. And the thing is like there's a couple of things there with the food going up with women is like a lot of women are just terrified to put on body fat, right? And like first off, body fat's not the enemy, right?
It
It's
is for
excessive
me,
body.
but okay. Yeah, for sure.
The excessive body fat is the enemy, right? Like putting on too much body fat is the problem. But like if we're training intensely, you're doing your maintenance cardio at least, and you're staying active throughout the day, like by either tracking steps or whatever metric it is that you use, like you don't need to freak out about gaining a ton of body fat. And then this is
Absolutely.
also where like a carb cycling approach is incredibly important with prep or off season. Like I use carb cycles in every phase with somebody. Like once we've established a baseline of food and I can see what type of response they're having from that food, I always move clients into some type of carb cycle. And like
Interesting.
there's going to be like a rotation of typically it'll start off with low days and high days. And then if they're in a diet, there's going to be more lows than there is high. And if they're in a surplus, there's going to be more high than there is low, right? So it's like we just need to create either the surplus or the deficit to push things along. And at the same time, it's like just like a diet isn't a race to see how little food we can eat. Off season's not a race to see how much food we can eat, right? It's like
Amen.
the
Fantastic. Great point.
the thing is like the one of the hardest things to get across to people is like, look, just because your weight didn't go up doesn't mean we're not growing. You are in an aggressive calorie surplus. You are growing. So like when we are building tissue and in an off season, if somebody doesn't gain weight for a couple of weeks, that's fine. At some point, we're either going to see, cool, yes, we need to push a little bit more, or it's going to start to shift in the right direction. And then at the same time, it's like if that weight stays the same, but you start to tighten up and look better, like you start to look leaner, that means we are changing composition, which means we are doing exactly what we were looking to do to begin with. So like it's not a race to the all you can eat buffet, right? It's not just like let me see how much food I can stuff in my face, because then yeah, for sure you're going to put on some body fat that you don't want to have, and then probably also dysregulate your hormones by being too fat, right? So it's like there's a ebb and flow to like if we go too low, there's going to be a problem. If we go too high, there's probably going to be a problem as well. Um, so like utilizing that carb cycle is really beneficial to keep appetite high and keep their desire to want to eat high, as well as keep body fat in a reasonable place, right? It's like we kind of have a set point, and once we see a client is at that point, let me try to keep them as close to that set point as I can, right? Like because that set point is a set point because your body's comfortable there, and that's probably where we're going to get the most growth. Like when you go beyond that and you have way too much body fat, there's a cascade of effects that happens, like down regulation of insulin sensitivity, up regulation of estrogen. Like there's all these different things that can occur for a male or a female when we go way too beyond that body fat set point. So it's like, what way can we try to keep your body fat as close to that as possible so that we're not just putting on stuff that we're going to have to cut off you in the long run anyways?
You hit on a number of really, really beneficial points. And I want to highlight something here that I think is important because so you mentioned you use carb cycling a lot and almost exclusively with your clients. I personally have found more static calories to be beneficial until the later stages of either contest prep or off season because I'm trying to work on that flexibility. And we have to remember that rest days are still recovery days. So I want to make sure that our calories on those rest days stay at a point where we are at maintenance or slightly above. If we're talking about a off season scenario, but carb cycling incredibly beneficial for maintaining appetite and preventing metabolic adaptations in either direction. So
Sure.
super super beneficial strategy. But here's an instance where we both get great results with our clients, but our approach to doing so is a little bit different. And we can steel man each other's arguments for sure, but every coach will have a preference. And as long as you can validate why you choose to the strategy that you're choosing for the individual, man, fucking fire away.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, look, there's certainly times that like I don't carb cycle people when it's like, look, we just need to stay with this high calorie surplus because we're getting a good response. And like maybe those low days are working against us. And like maybe they do need a little bit more food on those rest days so that we can recover and so that we can handle the amount of volume that we're looking at. But I think one of the number one things that we can do to make sure that someone can extend their off season for an extended period of time is keep their appetite in a good spot. So
Mhm.
like if that surplus is causing them a problem on those rest days, like maybe it's a just a cardio day and they're fairly chill the whole rest of the day, not doing very much, and they're eating this on that day that is now a much larger surplus because they are not outputting. If that wrecks your appetite, we need to have a conversation about what it looks like to go forward, right? Because like if that appetite goes, you are not going to want to do what I need you to do as we go deeper into the off season. So the more I can get someone to enjoy eating, the better, right? So there's a number of ways to go about that, and it's like the low days don't necessarily have to be a deficit, right? It's not like I'm putting them on a low day that's underneath their baseline amount of calories. Like maybe it's right at baseline, maybe it's just enough for what they need for that day. Maybe it's a 200 calorie surplus for the day, maybe it's something very minimal, but it's enough to just stimulate their appetite to be ready for that day that's a much more aggressive surplus that's really pushing the needle for their body weight.
One of the things that you mentioned that I want to also highlight is you said there is a set point for body fat. And this is an interesting conversation to have because I agree. And that set point of body fat is going to be different for every person based on what phase that they're in. Example, when I'm competing in powerlifting, I need to carry a little bit more body fat because I am much more strong when I'm carrying a little bit more body fat. When it comes to bodybuilding, I can maintain a bit of a lower body fat percentage because I'm not doing those internally stabilized movements. So I don't need as much structural stability and I can still drive output. And every single person is going to be different. I think John Jewett was one of the first people that I ever heard put this as simply as he did was the optimal body fat percentage for an off season is as fat as you need to be sleeping, eating, fucking, and performing.
100%.
Because if you can, be happy, hungry, horny, you're going to be in a great spot. And that amount of body fat is going to be different for every single person. I'm going through a cut right now personally. And over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed energy levels are a little bit lower, sleep starting to be a little bit disrupted. My libido is a little bit lower. But guess what? I'm also leaner than I've ever been other than a contest prep. So I'm like, okay, this is probably the point where I need to pull back because I'm not going to be stepping on stage. That's an indicator. So we can use these biofeedback metrics to know like, are we getting too fat? Because if you're getting too fat, your appetite's probably going to drop. Your training performance is also probably going to drop too. We've all been there in that situation where we're pushing food, pushing food, pushing food. All of a sudden, we can't push our sets to failure because we got a low back pump or we're getting crazy calf cramps or whatever it might be. And same goes for mini cuts, same goes for contest prep. Once you get past a certain point of leanness, the rules don't apply anymore, and we've got to be really creative with the approach that we do. So you hit home on like this set amount of body fat that you need to have might be fatter than you think you need to be, and that's okay. That's a great opportunity again to work on our relationship with ourselves as we work on our relationship with food, to understand that I have full control over changing my physique. I have full control over the food that I put in my mouth. I have full control over the fact that maybe I'm a little fatter than I want to be now, but I'm only a couple weeks away from feeling better. And maybe you just ride that line and you also hit on the fact that, hey, maybe we don't need to continue to push calories. Maybe we can just recomp at whatever weight that we're at, keep our calories the same, keep pushing training hard, 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 hard. Body will start to tighten up. You'll start to lose fat and build muscle in that position. Appetite will come back if you spend enough time there. And then all of a sudden, we're in a situation where we can add more calories back in and continue that runway of progression for the rest of the off season.
Yeah, and I think honestly, just one thing that really helps out people is when we can shift mindset from like, look, off season is not prep, off season is not a fat loss phase. With a fat loss phase, at some point you're going to get to a spot where you're seeing changes weekly. Off season's not that way. Like it's just unfortunately not. If it was, we would all be 300 pounds. Like we'd all be just mass monsters walking around, right? From just a couple of off seasons, but it is a long, slow, boring fucking process. So get comfortable with it because it's not fun. And the thing that I've said a number of times is off season is the rocks that everybody's ship breaks on, right? Like it's the thing that everybody's ship runs into and then they fall to pieces because
Mhm.
it is slow, it is boring. You don't see the same changes. You do feel like you're getting fat. Like, and it just is what it is. Like that is the nature of trying to put on as much tissue as you possibly can. You're going to have to get comfortable not being the shredded individual. You're gonna have to be comfortable with that. And like I think one of the biggest things that you can do for an individual like that is stop looking at yourself. Stop. Just fucking stop. Put on a big t-shirt, put on the hoodie, cover yourself up. Don't stop to look and flex in the mirror every 5 minutes. Like stop doing those things. The more you don't look at yourself, the more it's out of sight, out of mind. And then if you can just sit here and again, like we talked about earlier, focus on your strength metrics, on your training metrics. How good do I feel in the gym when I'm able to go in there? How good is my pump? How good is my connection? Like, how good am I recovering? If you can focus on those things and go, cool, those things are doing really well. So I must be doing something right. That's a good thing, right? So stop being so worried about what you look like every single day and just let it be what it's going to be. Like look at yourself when it's time to check in and that's it. And then even then, maybe you don't even need to look at the pictures. Maybe you just submit them and let your coach do it if it's that big of a mind fuck for you, you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna steelman an argument in the opposite direction, and I will say that this also has to do with your individual goals, right? So we're talking about in the scenario of someone who wants to put on the most amount of muscle tissue possible. Maybe you're not that person, right? Like I'm planning. I'll use myself as an example. I'm planning to continue to compete in bodybuilding. I don't want to be 265 pounds anymore. I have no desire to do that. Does that mean that the progress in muscle gain can't be made because I'm not willing to get as fat as I used to be? Absolutely not. Is it going to happen slower? For sure. Am I going to be able to put on as much? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know until I try. But you can have that conversation with your coach and tell them, hey, I'm not comfortable with it with as fat as I'm getting. This is compromising my values. This is with the direction that I want to go. And it's the responsibility of that coach to be open to that discussion because one of my principles as a coach is I'm going to challenge your beliefs. I'm not going to challenge your values. Right. So
100%.
if you have a limiting belief that is preventing you from achieving your goals, I'm going to push back on you. But if you're telling me, hey, this is compromising my values, oh, we're going to have a great discussion. And either we're going to align your values a little bit better with your goals, or we're going to adjust the plan to make sure that you are not compromising your values and still able to make progress.
Yeah.
And
A
that's a
good
coaching relationship.
yeah, a good coach can pivot and change things as they need and still accomplish the same goal, you know. And that's a great argument from your point of view is like, hey, just communicate with the individual that you're working with, right? And like I'm in that same boat as you is like I am done competing and I was 265 and I got that weight. Like was it the most comfortable thing ever? No, but I still had room to get bigger and like I'm certainly not that individual. I'm not going to be the guy that's 300 pounds. Like I struggled to get to 265. Like I don't have the type of appetite that some of my bigger friends do. Like it was a force feeding journey to try to get to where I even was, you know? So yeah, definitely like have that conversation with them. Go, hey, look, is there something we can do where we can slow this down a little bit to where like I'm a little bit more comfortable or whatever? Like that's for sure, that's an okay thing. But you also need to understand that that might slow the total scheme down, right?
Yep, for
It
sure.
might slow down your process and you need to be comfortable with that. You can't tell me that, hey, I'm not comfortable pushing this hard. Can we slow this down a little bit? But also, I want my results in 12 weeks. Like, you're gonna have to fucking wait. You're gonna have to, if we need to slow it down, that means it's going to have to go for a longer period of time, and maybe we have to do 3 or 4 pushes up before you're at a position where we are good enough to get on stage. Are you comfortable with that? So like, that is that conversation that has to be had, and go, hey, cool, that's fine, we can do that, but are you going to be able to hang in there for x amount of time while we make this goal happen at a slower pace?
Well, even the conversation of like being good enough to step on stage, and I want to be mindful of your time here, but so this is the last point I'll kind
I'm
of make,
chilling.
but like the the concept of good enough to step on stage. I think a lot of situations coaches will make that decision for the client,
Mm,
and I think that's really wrong. I think we're doing the client a disservice because good enough to step on stage is going to be different for each person, and maybe getting on stage is the goal, right? And
yep.
being better than they were before is the goal. Maybe the goal isn't a pro card. Maybe the goal isn't to win the show. Maybe the goal is to show up at your best and let the chips fall where they may. That's okay too.
Yep.
And I know I've heard of a number of coaches, push clients to levels that they're uncomfortable with, but they go along with it because they hired such and such famous coach, and I think that's doing you a disservice. So when you're
100%.
looking for a coach, or you are a coach dealing with clients, that conversation as to what are these person's goals? What are their values? How can I adjust my approach to play within that? And also challenge them to be the best version of themselves. And that doesn't always mean taking the most aggressive approach possible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like a prime example here is one of my clients that got on stage this year was Caston. He's a tall guy. He's 6'4",
Oh, wow.
and
Jeez.
yeah, really tall dude. And we had a discussion of like, we had been pushing him up for a while, and things were starting to slow down, and we weren't really seeing like the same type of yield from pushing him up anymore. And we had a conversation. I was like, well, we can either just do a mini cut and cut you down and kind of like reset things for a little bit and then push again, or we can just stack you up on stage and see how things look, and use that time of you coming out of the show where now you're going to be your leanest you ever possibly have been, and use that as a better foundation to grow a bigger, leaner physique, right?
Hmm.
Like, I'm not a coach that talks about like rebounding, because I think rebounding is looked at in a fairly poor manner. Like the after a show is not an ideal time to build tissue. It's a really ideal time for you to get fucking fat. Like if you just start pushing food into your
True.
face.
Agreed.
Yeah, like, look, I've got some disgusting pictures in my phone from years ago where I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna rebound," and it looks great for like 3, 4 weeks, and then there's this
You
kid.
wake up one day, you're like, fuck, I look fucking great. Then the next day you wake up, you're like, shit, I got fat.
Your face is this big and you're
You're like,
having a hard time
shit.
breathing, and like the rebound phase is not a spot for us to like push food aggressively and continue to push your drugs hard and do all that stuff, because it's like, dude, your body doesn't give a fuck about you getting on stage. It's going, where's all my body fat in case this motherfucker goes through a famine. Like, we got to have something to keep this human
Hmm.
alive.
We
So
just went through a famine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if this comes up again, we're gonna die. Like, that's what your body is thinking to itself. So it's just trying to put on a bunch of body fat. But if we handle that time period post show well, and use that maintenance phase and health phase after the show, and keep you from getting too fat during that time period, it can set us up to be able to build a bigger physique that is now leaner, right? And
Agreed.
like, he's a prime example, because he's like, I don't even know how many weeks into his offseason he is now. He's bigger than he's ever been and leaner than he's ever been. He's almost 270 right now,
Oh,
and keeping
nice.
a very, very good lean physique for the offseason. Like, he still has glute lines, and he's never had glute lines at this size. So like, that's going to put us in a better position for him to prep the next time, right? So
Fucking
it's like,
6'4", 270 is a
dude,
big boy.
yeah, he's fucking huge. I saw him this morning. I just laughed. I was like, bro, you look massive. It's so much fun, man. But yeah, so it's like, was it like, going back to what we were discussing, is like, was it ideal for him to get on stage with not enough muscle tissue? Well, it depends on what your definition of ideal was, right? Because like, yeah, we knew he probably wasn't going to have as much muscle tissue as he possibly could, being as tall as he is. But one, we got to see how he stacked up on stage, and it was pretty fucking good.
Yep.
Two, it set us up for us to be able to get enough tissue, right? Because
Mhm.
like there's going to come a point where just continuing to be in an aggressive off season for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, like it's not going to continue to pay off the same results it was in the first quarter of it, right? So
100%.
sometimes an aggressive diet is the best thing to set you up to be able to put on that excessive tissue that you need.
Yeah, I love it. Nick, man, thank you so much for joining me. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes. But if you're not following Nick, at Nick_Bagley_ or at long_Hall_fitness on Instagram, he's putting out some great content. If you're looking to work with a coach, I could definitely put my stamp of approval on Nick. Doing some great things and just continuing to grow. And I love to see it, man. Good people doing great things for the people they work with.
I appreciate you, man. I'm excited to see this thing come out, and I'm excited for the next time you come down to Texas and then
Oh,
officially move here.
well, so April we're moving to Charlotte. And
Hell
then
yeah.
once we're in Charlotte, it's gonna be easy to travel back and forth between different places. And
Charlotte's
traveling
great.
domestically is a lot easier. And
Yeah.
we're just super excited. Now we got to do the adult stuff and remortgage our house and do all that sort of stuff. So it's a
Yay.
lot of paperwork. Yeah, I know. Yay, more taxes to the government. Yay.
Yay.
But I really appreciate it, man. And we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you, man.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.